I still remember the text that shattered my world. "We're heading to Giovanni's at 7. Don't wait up." My sister's engagement dinner was happening without me, just 3 miles from my apartment. I found out through a group chat I wasn't supposed to be included in. Someone had accidentally added me, then quickly removed me, but not before I saw everything. The location, the guest list with 20 family members, including cousins from California I barely knew. Everyone except me. When I called my mom to ask about it, she dismissed it with, "It's just a dinner, honey, nothing special." But the photos that flooded social media that night told a different story. Crystal champagne flutes raised in celebration. My sister in her new cream dress, the one we were supposed to shop for together. My parents beaming with pride. The custom cake with, "Congratulations, Emma and David," written in gold frosting. The professional photographer capturing every moment I wasn't part of. For 3 years, I kept quiet about what I knew. About Emma, about my parents, about the real reason I was being systematically erased from family milestones. Until my sister's wedding day, when I couldn't stay silent any longer. Growing up in suburban Connecticut, our family had always appeared picture perfect from the outside. My father Richard, a successful corporate attorney, my mother Diane, who ran the most sought-after interior design firm in Fairfield County, my sister Emma, 3 years younger than me, and seemingly blessed with every advantage, and me, Olivia, the responsible eldest daughter. Our colonial-style house, with its manicured lawn, hosted countless neighborhood barbecues and holiday parties. Mom insisted on proper Sunday dinners, with cloth napkins and the good china, even when it was just the 4 of us. "Presentation matters," she'd remind us while arranging flowers for the centerpiece. "People judge you on appearances." It was a lesson that would shape our family in ways I couldn't understand until much later. Emma and I were close as children, despite our differences. She was outgoing and effortlessly popular, while I was more reserved and academically focused. I still have the friendship bracelets we made at Camp Wildwood every summer, tucked away in my jewelry box alongside other relics of our shared childhood. The shift in our family dynamic began subtly during my junior year of high school. I'd been dating Jason Mercer, the son of Dad's biggest client. It wasn't serious, just typical high school stuff. Movies at the Westport Cineplex, milkshakes at the Harbor Diner, study sessions that involved more laughing than studying. But my parents treated each date like a diplomatic mission, coaching me on conversation topics and appropriate behavior. "The Mercers are key to your father's partnership track," Mom would say while helping me pick out clothes. "Be charming but not forward, intelligent but not intimidating." When Jason broke up with me 3 months later for Stephanie Wheeler, my father's disappointment was palpable. He didn't speak to me for nearly a week. Mom was more direct. "Couldn't you have tried harder, Olivia? That connection was important to us." I was 16, heartbroken not just from the breakup, but from realizing I was viewed as a networking opportunity rather than a daughter with feelings. That summer, Emma started high school orientation. Within weeks, she was dating Tyler Mercer, Jason's younger brother. My parents were ecstatic. They renovated our basement into a teen hangout space that conveniently featured all of Tyler's favorite games and snacks. Friday night family dinners became invite the Mercers overnights. The culmination came during my high school graduation dinner at the Wellington, the fanciest restaurant in town. As we waited for our entrees, my father clinked his glass for a toast. I straightened up, expecting words of pride for my valedictorian speech or full scholarship to Columbia. Instead, he raised his glass and announced, "We have wonderful news. Emma has been selected for the Mercer Foundation's Young Leaders Program. Only 5 students in the state were chosen, and she'll be mentored by Robert Mercer himself." The program I'd applied for and been rejected from 6 months earlier. The rejection letter was still pinned to my bulletin board at home. "To Emma, Everyone cheered, while I forced a smile that hurt my face. That night established the pattern that would define our family for years to come. Emma's accomplishments, no matter how small, were celebrated lavishly. Mine were acknowledged with quiet nods or, more often, compared unfavorably to hers. Emma got an A in advanced chemistry. Weren't you getting B's in that class, Olivia? Emma's sorority raised $10,000 for charity. Your academic honor society just did a book drive, right? The grand gesture came when I was 23, fresh out of graduate school with a master's in social work, a career choice my parents had made clear they found disappointing. All that education to make no money, Dad had remarked. I was struggling to make rent on my apartment in New Haven when my grandmother Catherine passed away. Grandma Catherine had been my refuge growing up, the one person who seemed to value me for exactly who I was. Her brownstone in Boston's Back Bay neighborhood was my safe haven during college breaks when home felt too suffocating. At the reading of her will, I learned she had left me her mother's sapphire ring, a family heirloom that had been promised to me since childhood, and a substantial trust fund that would allow me financial independence. For the first time, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I wouldn't need my parents' approval or support anymore. That's when I discovered the secret. Not all of it, not yet, but enough to understand that the perfect family narrative had always been a carefully constructed facade, and that Emma, golden child Emma, had a role in maintaining it that went far beyond sibling rivalry. Last June, Emma's wedding preparations consumed our family completely. The venue was the Rosecliff Mansion in Newport, Rhode Island, a Gilded Age landmark where my sister had dreamed of getting married since we'd toured it on a family vacation when she was 12. My parents spared no expense. A 10-piece orchestra, custom-blended floral arrangements from a Manhattan botanist, a 5-course dinner catered by a chef who'd appeared on multiple cooking shows. I learned about most of these details secondhand through my cousin Jess, who called me regularly with updates, her voice always tinged with awkward sympathy. "I thought you'd want to know," she'd say after each revelation. 3 months before the wedding, my mother finally called me directly. "We need to discuss your role in the ceremony," she said, her tone businesslike, as if arranging a meeting with a client. "I assumed I wasn't in the bridal party," I replied, trying to keep the hurt from my voice. Emma had already chosen her college roommates and our cousin Jess as bridesmaids, according to the wedding website I'd found while searching her name online. "Well, that's what I'm calling about," Mom said with forced brightness. "Emma would like you to do a reading during the ceremony. Something brief but meaningful. She thought it would be appropriate." Appropriate. The word hung between us, heavy with implication. Not special or meaningful, or any word that might suggest I was wanted there. Just appropriate, a box to be checked. "I see," I managed. "And what about the rehearsal dinner? The bridal shower? The bachelorette weekend in Napa that Aunt Linda accidentally mentioned to me?" Silence stretched across the line before my mother sighed. "Olivia, you know how complicated things have been. Emma felt it would be less stressful for everyone if you just attended the main event. You understand, don't you?" I didn't understand. Not fully. But the fragments I had gathered over the years were forming a clearer picture, one that made my stomach twist with both anger and vindication. "I understand perfectly," I replied. "Text me the reading she wants me to do. I'll be there." The week of the wedding, Newport was experiencing a heat wave unusual for early summer. I arrived at the hotel 2 days before the ceremony, checking into the smallest room in the wedding block, located on a different floor from the rest of the family. At the welcome dinner, a clam bake on the beach that I'd only learned about from the itinerary placed in my welcome bag, I stood awkwardly by the raw bar, watching my extended family interact with Emma's fiancé David's relatives from Seattle. My parents worked the crowd like professional politicians, my father's hand firmly clasped on David's father's shoulder as they discussed their shared love of sailing. Emma floated through the bathroom in a white linen dress, her engagement ring, a 3-carat oval diamond that had belonged to David's grandmother, catching the setting sun. When she finally approached me, her smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm so glad you could make it," she said, the same phrase she'd used with distant relatives she barely knew. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, though I almost did, given how hard everyone worked to exclude me from everything leading up to this. Her smile faltered. "That's not fair, Liv. You know why things are this way." "Do I? Because all I know is what I've pieced together. No one's ever had the decency to actually tell me to my face." She glanced nervously toward our parents, who were watching us from across the beach, their expressions tense. "This isn't the time or place. Can't you just be happy for me? For once, can't this not be about you and your feelings?" The irony of her statement was so staggering, I almost laughed. "That's rich, Emma. Really rich." Before she could respond, David appeared at her side, placing a protective arm around her waist. "Everything okay here?" he asked, his voice pleasant but his eyes wary as he looked at me. "Absolutely perfect," I said with a brittle smile. I was just congratulating my sister on her impeccable timing. Getting married right after making partner at her law firm, right before turning 30. Mom and Dad must be thrilled with your life checklist. Emma's face flushed. "David, would you mind getting me another drink? I need a minute with my sister." When he reluctantly left, she leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know you're hurt. I get it. But don't you dare make a scene this weekend. Mom and Dad have spent a fortune on this wedding, and I won't let you ruin it because you're still bitter about ancient history." "Ancient history?" I echoed incredulously. "Is that what we're calling it now?" She straightened up, composing herself visibly. "The reading is from Captain Corelli's mandolin. It's in your welcome packet. Don't be late to the ceremony tomorrow." And with that, she walked away, immediately transforming back into the radiant bride as she rejoined her fiancé. That night, alone in my hotel room, I reread the email from Marcus Cohen, my grandmother's former attorney, which I'd received 3 weeks earlier. The email that had finally confirmed what I'd suspected for years, containing scanned documents that made my hands shake as I'd viewed them for the first time. I also opened the small box I'd brought with me, Grandma Catherine's sapphire ring, the one possession of hers I truly treasured, which I'd planned to wear as my something blue when Emma had initially asked me to be her maid of honor years ago, before everything fell apart. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Breakfast tomorrow at 9 a.m. in the hotel restaurant. Family only. Smart casual dress." Another event I was only being informed of at the last minute. But this time, I didn't feel the familiar sting of exclusion. Instead, I felt a strange calm settling over me as I made my decision. I would attend the breakfast. I would perform my assigned reading at the ceremony. I would smile in the family photos. And then, when the moment was right, I would finally speak the truth that had been buried under years of perfect family portraits and carefully cultivated lies. The truth that would change everything. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, the heat wave finally broken by a gentle breeze off the Atlantic. The Rosecliff mansion gleamed white against the blue sky, its marble terraces and manicured lawns transformed with cream and blush roses for Emma's perfect day. I arrived at the family breakfast wearing a simple navy dress, my grandmother's sapphire ring prominently displayed on my right hand. The private dining room fell momentarily silent when I entered, conversation resuming a beat too late to seem natural. My father nodded stiffly in acknowledgement, while my mother bustled over, her smile tight. "Olivia, there you are. We're just about to order. You remember David's parents, the Callaways?" The performative normalcy continued through breakfast, with conversation carefully steered towards safe topics. The perfect weather, the historic venue, the previous night's clam bake. I played along, answering questions about my work in New Haven with practiced brevity. Nobody mentioned my conspicuous absence from all pre-wedding festivities. Nobody asked why the bride's only sister hadn't been included in the bridal party. The elaborate dance of pretense we'd perfected over years continued uninterrupted, until my Aunt Linda, always slightly oblivious to family undercurrents, exclaimed while examining my hand, "Catherine's sapphire! I'm so glad you're wearing it today, Olivia. Your grandmother would be thrilled." My mother's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. My father cleared his throat loudly and attempted to change the subject, but David's mother had already taken the bait. "What a beautiful ring," she remarked. "Is it a family heirloom?" "Yes," I said, twisting it slowly on my finger. "My grandmother left it to me when she died, along with some other things." "How lovely that you have something of hers for today," David's mother continued, unaware of the tension surrounding us. "Family legacies are so important, don't you think, Richard?" My father looked as if he might choke on his Eggs Benedict. "Indeed," he managed. "Speaking of the ceremony, Olivia, have you practiced your reading?" "Thoroughly," I assured him with a smile.
I wouldn't want to disappoint anyone. Emma, seated at the far end of the table beside David, hadn't looked at me once during the meal. Her knuckles were white around her water glass. The hours before the ceremony passed in a blur of controlled chaos. As a non-member of the bridal party, I dressed alone in my hotel room while wedding photographers documented Emma and her bridesmaids drinking champagne and getting their hair styled in the presidential suite. I arrived at Rosecliff exactly 45 minutes before the ceremony as instructed, took my place in the processional lineup, and accepted the card with my reading from the wedding coordinator, who had to check her list twice to confirm who I was. The ceremony space was breathtaking. The mansion's grand ballroom transformed with cascading white orchids and flickering candles. 200 guests filled the gold Chiavari chairs, the Mercer family prominently seated in the front row beside my maternal grandparents who had flown in from Arizona. As Emma appeared at the end of the aisle on our father's arm, resplendent in a custom Vera Wang gown, a collective gasp rose from the assembled guests. She was radiant, her happiness seemingly genuine as she locked eyes with David waiting at the altar. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of something like remorse for what I was about to do. Then I remembered the documents in my clutch, and my resolve hardened once more. When the time came for my reading, I approached the ornate podium with measured steps. The officiant, a federal judge who was a friend of David's family, introduced me simply as Emma's sister, Olivia. Not maid of honor, not best friend, just sister, the biological connection that couldn't be erased, though they'd certainly tried to minimize it. I placed the reading card on the podium, smoothed it flat with my hands, and looked out at the assembled guests. My parents sat rigidly in the front row, their expressions a study in polite attention. Emma and David stood hand in hand before the floral arch, her back partially turned to me. "The passage I've been asked to read," I began, my voice steady, "is from Captain Corelli's Mandolin by Louis de Bernières. It speaks about love being more than just the excitement of the beginning, but the deepening commitment that comes with time and truth." I paused, looking directly at my parents. "Truth," I repeated. Such an important foundation for any relationship, wouldn't you agree? A flicker of alarm crossed my father's face. My mother's smile became frozen. Before I read this beautiful passage about love and commitment, I think it's important to acknowledge another kind of commitment, the commitment to family, to honesty within that family. Emma had turned fully toward me now, her eyes wide with panic. David looked confused, glancing between his bride and me as if trying to decipher what was happening. "You see," I continued, setting aside the reading card, "I recently received some interesting documents from my grandmother Catherine's attorney, documents she arranged to have sent to me upon certain conditions being met." My father half rose from his seat before my mother's hand clamped down on his arm.
These documents reveal that 15 years ago, my father approached my grandmother for a substantial loan to save his law firm from bankruptcy following a class action lawsuit. A loan my grandmother agreed to provide with one condition: that the academic and career achievements of her younger granddaughter, Emma, be prioritized and celebrated above all else to ensure at least one Bell daughter would achieve the professional success my grandmother valued so highly. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the audience. Emma's face had drained of all color. What my father and grandmother didn't know was that my mother had made a separate arrangement. In exchange for my grandmother funding Emma's education at Princeton, instead of the state school our family could then afford, my mother agreed that Emma would pursue law rather than her passion for art history. That Emma would follow the path my grandmother had envisioned for me before I disappointed her by choosing social work. I reached into my clutch and removed a folded paper, holding it up. I have the contract they signed. All parties agreed that I was never to know about this arrangement, that I would be systematically sidelined to focus all family resources and attention on Emma's more promising future, an arrangement that continued long after the original loan was repaid. The ballroom had gone completely silent. David had stepped away from Emma slightly, his expression thunderstruck. My father was now standing fully, his face contorted with rage and humiliation. "Olivia, that's enough," he bellowed. "No, Dad, it's not. For 15 years, I've been treated as an afterthought in this family, excluded from milestones, gaslighted about why I wasn't included, made to feel like I was imagining the preferential treatment Emma received. All because of a business arrangement none of you had the courage to tell me about." I turned to Emma, whose mascara had begun to streak with silent tears. "And you knew. Maybe not at first, but you've known for years. Yet you went along with it, accepted every advantage, watched me struggle alone, and said nothing." I carefully returned the document to my clutch and picked up the reading card again. "Love is not breathlessness," I recited calmly from the selected passage. "It is not excitement. It is not the promulgation of promises of eternal passion. That is just being in love, which any fool can do. Love itself is what is left over when being in love has burned away." I looked directly at my sister. "What's left over when the lies burn away, Emma? I guess we're about to find out." With that, I stepped away from the podium, walked steadily down the aisle past the stunned guests, and exited the ballroom without looking back. Behind me, chaos erupted, my father shouting my name, my mother's high-pitched attempts to restore order, Emma's audible sobbing. As I pushed through the mansion's grand entrance doors into the sunshine, I slipped my grandmother's sapphire ring from my finger and dropped it into the fountain on the front lawn. Some legacies weren't worth preserving. The aftermath of my revelation at Emma's wedding was as explosive as you might imagine. I spent that night in a different hotel, my phone silenced as it lit up with messages ranging from furious to concerned. Cousin Jess texted that the ceremony had eventually continued, though shortened considerably, with one of David's sisters hastily replacing me for the reading. The reception that followed was described as tense but determined, with my parents putting on brave faces while whispers circulated among the guests. I stayed in Newport for 3 more days, not out of any desire to make amends, but because I needed the ocean's steady presence to anchor me after the storm I'd unleashed. I walked the cliff walk each morning, watching waves crash against the rocks below, feeling simultaneously lighter and more alone than I'd ever been. On the 3rd day, as I sat on a bench overlooking the Atlantic, a shadow fell across me. David, still in town for what should have been the first days of his honeymoon. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. I gestured to the empty space beside me, and he sat, maintaining a respectful distance. "Emma told me everything," he said after a long silence. "Not just what you revealed at the ceremony, but all of it. Things even you don't know. I turned to look at him, surprised by the lack of anger in his expression. Such as? Such as the fact that she tried to back out of the arrangement when she was 19, told your parents she wanted to transfer from pre-law to the art history program. Your father threatened to stop paying her tuition entirely. He ran a hand through his hair, looking out at the horizon. She also showed me emails she sent to your grandmother 3 years ago, begging her to release everyone from the contract after she passed the bar. Catherine refused. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, unsure whether to believe him. "Because Emma asked me to. Because, despite what you think, she's been carrying her own burden of guilt and resentment. The golden child pedestal is a precarious place to live." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch, placing it on the bench between us. "She also asked me to give you this. She saw you throw it in the fountain." I recognized the shape of my grandmother's ring through the velvet. "I don't want it anymore." "Then sell it," he said simply. "Use the money to build a new life, one that has nothing to do with your family's expectations. But don't throw away something valuable out of anger. That's what your parents and grandmother did with you." He stood to leave, brushing invisible sand from his khakis. "For what it's worth, the wedding is officially postponed. Emma moved out of your parents' house this morning. She's staying with me in Boston for a while." After he left, I sat holding the velvet pouch, feeling its weight in my palm. Eventually, I slipped the ring back on my finger, not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder that I had survived being the sacrificial lamb of my family's ambitions. 2 weeks after returning to New Haven, I received an email from Marcus Cohen, my grandmother's attorney. He requested a meeting at his Boston office regarding additional matters related to Catherine Bell's estate. Intrigued and wary, I made the drive to Boston the following Friday. The leather-scented office with its views of the public garden felt like a setting for another family ambush, but Marcus was alone when I arrived. He ushered me to a seat and placed a thick folder on the desk between us. "Miss Bell, I want to apologize for my part in this situation," he began, his voice grave. "Your grandmother was a formidable woman and a valued client, but her instructions placed me in an ethical gray area I've come to regret." "What instructions?" I asked, eyeing the folder. "Catherine left specific directions regarding the disclosure of certain documents, the ones you received before your sister's wedding. What you don't know is that those documents were only part of her plan." He opened the folder and turned it toward me. "This is the complete file." What I read over the next hour reconstitutionalized everything I thought I knew about my grandmother and my family. Yes, there had been a contract regarding Emma's education and career path, but it wasn't born of simple favoritism or disappointment in my choices. It was the culmination of a decades-long power struggle between my grandmother and my father, a man she had never believed was good enough for her daughter. The contract had been Catherine's way of ensuring that at least one Bell granddaughter would be financially independent enough to escape what she saw as Richard Bell's controlling influence. In her mind, she was rescuing Emma while punishing my father by forcing him to live under her thumb for years. The fact that I became collateral damage in their war was apparently an acceptable consequence. "There's more," Marcus said, sliding another document across the desk. "Your grandmother established a second trust, one that would only be activated if the terms of her agreement with your parents became known to you." I scanned the document, my vision blurring with shock as I registered the amount. It was substantially more than what Emma had received, enough to establish a foundation, create a scholarship, buy a house in any city I chose. At the bottom was a handwritten note in my grandmother's elegant script. "For Olivia, who deserved better than to be a pawn. Use this to rewrite the story they chose for you." When I left Marcus's office, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the public garden. I found myself walking to my grandmother's old brownstone on Commonwealth Avenue, now owned by new occupants who had no idea of the complicated legacy that had once resided there. Standing on the sidewalk, looking up at the bay windows where I'd spent so many weekends seeking refuge from my family, I finally allowed myself to cry, not from self-pity, but from the complex grief of realizing that even the one person I thought had truly loved me for myself had been playing her own power games with our lives. That evening, my phone rang with Emma's number. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. "I didn't think you'd pick up," she said, her voice smaller than I'd heard it since childhood. "I almost didn't." "I deserved what you did at the wedding," she continued. "Maybe not the timing, but the truth needed to come out." "Yes, it did. I've been seeing a therapist," she said after a pause. "I moved out of the condo Dad bought me. I'm looking at art history programs in Chicago." "Chicago is far from Boston," I observed. "And from Connecticut. That's the point." She took an audible breath. "I don't expect forgiveness, Liv. But I want you to know I'm trying to find my way back to the person I might have been without all their machinations." We talked for nearly 2 hours that night, really talked for the first time in years. Not as the golden child and the scapegoat, but as two women unpacking the realization that we had both been manipulated in different ways, her with golden handcuffs, me with systematic exclusion. 6 months later, I used part of my trust fund to purchase a Victorian house in Portland, Maine, far enough from Connecticut to avoid casual family visits, but close enough that the few relationships worth salvaging weren't impossible to maintain. I converted the ground floor into a counseling center, specializing in family trauma and identity recovery. Emma enrolled in Northwestern's art history program. We text weekly and video chat monthly, a careful rebuilding of sisterhood on new terms, without the toxic competition our parents had fostered. She's dating a photography professor now, someone who encourages her passion for 19th century portraiture and knows nothing of the Bell family dynamics. My parents made predictable overtures after learning about my inheritance: sudden invitations to holidays, unexpected deliveries of childhood mementos, emails reminiscing about happier times. I maintain minimal contact, engaging only on my terms. My father had a minor heart attack last spring, which might once have sent me running back into the fold out of duty. Instead, I sent flowers and continued with my scheduled clients that week. The sapphire ring sits in a safe deposit box now. I'll likely never wear it again, but David was right. Discarding something of value out of anger would only continue the pattern my family had established. Someday I might sell it and use the proceeds to fund scholarships for first-generation college students, transforming its legacy of control into one of opportunity. As for the grand gesture that had started it all, my grandmother's manipulative bequest, I've come to see it as a twisted gift. Without the pain it caused, I might never have broken free from the narrative my family had written for me. I might have continued seeking approval that would never come, measuring my worth against impossible standards designed to keep me subordinate. The unexpected twist came last month when I received a large manila envelope containing Emma's half of our grandmother's journals, spanning from 1952 to 2018. "I've read my portion," Emma's accompanying note read. "You should have these pages too. We can't understand who we are until we understand who she was." I've been reading one entry each night before bed. The portrait emerging is of a complex woman shaped by her own family trauma, a brilliant mind constrained by the gender expectations of her era, who channeled her thwarted ambitions into controlling the next generations. Not a villain, but not the saint I'd created in my childhood memories either. Just a flawed human trying to correct her own past through our futures, creating new wounds in the process. Last week, I found the entry from my 8th birthday. My grandmother had taken me to the Museum of Fine Arts, where I'd been captivated by an exhibition of healing arts from cultures around the world. Olivia stood before the Navajo sand painting for nearly 20 minutes, she'd written. When I asked what she found so fascinating, she said, "They make it perfect and then they destroy it on purpose, Grandma."
They believe healing comes from learning to let go. Such wisdom from a child. I wonder if I'll ever learn that lesson myself. She never did learn to let go, but standing in the wreckage of the family narrative she helped architect, I finally have. Looking back now, 3 years after my sister's disrupted wedding, I realize that families are stories we tell ourselves, stories that can trap us or free us, depending on who controls the narrative. For most of my life, I was a secondary character in my own family story, always in the wings while Emma took center stage. But the moment I spoke my truth in that ornate ballroom, I reclaimed my voice and began writing my own chapters. The counseling center is thriving now. Every day, I work with people unpacking similar legacies of conditional love and manipulation. We talk about how family systems can both wound and heal us, how breaking painful patterns doesn't mean destroying every connection, just redefining them on healthier terms. Emma visited last month. We walked along the Portland coastline, our conversation flowing more easily than it has since childhood. She's curating her first exhibition, portraits of women from the Gilded Age whose ambitions were channeled into controlling their families. I recognized the subtle reference to our grandmother and appreciated that Emma, too, is transforming her pain into something meaningful. The truth is, healing isn't linear. Some days I still catch myself seeking approval that will never come, measuring my life against invisible yardsticks installed in my psyche long ago. But those moments grow rarer. The story I'm living now is authentically mine, messy and imperfect, but real. If you're watching this and recognizing patterns from your own family, know that you deserve to be more than a supporting character in someone else's narrative. Your worth isn't determined by how well you fulfill roles assigned to you by others. The most powerful moment in any story is when you realize you can put down the script others have written for you and create your own. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to hear more journeys of transformation. And remember, sometimes the family we build after the one we're born into is where we find our truest belonging.